Ted was listening to a local country music station as he sat in the parking lot of the Best Western Hotel. It had been almost 2 days since he last slept, and he was existing on coffee and some pills one of his work friends had given him. Ted knew Carla would be able to recognize his pickup but was hoping he had hidden it good enough for him to get some photos of her in the parking lot soon. Ted also was out of cigarettes, and he was getting irritable. "Why, Carla, what happened to our marriage?" he asked, knowing there would be no answer. Now his life was in tatters. This nightmare started 3 days ago when he got to his job. Ted was an enterprise architect working for an international software company. Going back to his days attending the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Ted always had the ability to see concepts so important to developing and bring to the market software solutions that worked. He met Carla about a year after he left MIT, and after a year-long courtship, they got married at the church Carla's family attended in her hometown of Springfield, Ohio. After they got married, Ted and Carla moved into a nice 2-bedroom apartment about 3 miles from his job. Carla did not have to work, Ted made enough money, and they had a nice life. That day 3 days ago, Ted was walking from the clean room to the main offices when Gus called out to him to wait up. Ted turned to Gus and smiled and said, "Come on, old man." Gus was not smiling as he looked at Ted. Ted knew the moment he looked at Gus something was wrong. Gus and Ted were good friends, as was Carla and Gus's wife Katie. Ted knew that Katie was having some medical problems, so he first thought something was wrong with Katie. "Ted," Gus said, "we need to go to your office and chat now, Ted." Ted was already late for an important meeting that involved a Zoom meeting with their California offices and their offices in Dallas. "It's important, Ted, sorry man." After closing the door, Gus turned to Ted, now sitting at his desk, and said, "Okay Gus, what is so important you need to make me late for this meeting?" Gus sighed and said, "Ted, Carla is cheating on you." Ted exploded, "Get the hell out of my office, and if you ever disrespect my wife again, I will push all your teeth down your throat, do you hear me?" Gus stood there and took the verbal abuse. After he got the venom out of his system, Ted put his head in his hands and started to cry. He knew Gus would not say something like that unless he believed it was true. Gus went on. "Ted, when I got home from work yesterday, Katie was sitting in our bedroom in the dark just looking outside. It took me a few minutes to find out what was happening, but Katie finally told me that she had saw Carla kissing another man and she did not know who he was. She did take a photo, and I now have that photo on my phone. Katie does the books for that Best Western and was sitting in her car when they drove in. As you can see, Ted, the photo was taken in that man's car, and you can clearly see Carla." Then the man took out a key card and opened the door. "Katie got so sick she threw up and came home. Text me that photo please, Gus," Ted said. "Tell Katie I said thank you, both of you are good friends and I will never forget this." Ted walked briskly to the room when the meeting was taking place and sat down in the rear of the room. After a while, George Mills, the general manager, spoke to his boss in California and said that Ted knew that answer. All eyes started looking at Ted, and he said, "What was the question again?" George said, "Can we get back on that question at another time?" "Yes," the other man said, and they ended the meeting. "What is wrong with you, Ted?" George asked. "This company pays you a lot of money to work on these problems and find solutions." "I am very disappointed, Ted," George said as they walked toward George's office. "Mr. Mills, about an hour ago I learned my wife Carla is cheating on me. As far as I know, she may be doing it right now." George softened a bit and said, "Let's go talk." George knew it was going to cause problems, but he knew Ted was useless to him in that state of mind, and he told him to go home. Ted went home that afternoon, but found Carla was not there. So, he packed up some clothes and things out of the bathroom and left. That evening Carla had texted him several times, and finally, after Ted did not reply, she tried to call him. In a fit of anger, Ted stopped his car and got a small hammer out and destroyed his phone. He hit it so hard that he ruptured the battery and it burst into flames. He watched it burn, and when it stopped burning, he left it on the side of the road and went on to see if his sister Sue was at home. When he got there, he saw she was home and came out onto the porch and said, "Hello, stranger." When she saw the look on Ted's face, she knew something was wrong. Ted asked Sue if he could crash there tonight. Of course, Ted, get your bag and come inside. Clint will be home soon. Clint was Sue's husband and the father of her 3 daughters. After telling Sue the story, her only comment was, Ted, make sure of your facts before you accuse Carla of this. Sue, this is why I am here. I want to remember that one of Clint's brothers was a police officer that also works on the side as a private investigator. Yes, Sue said, but I am not sure he does this kind of work. Scott investigates workman compensation fraud, Ted. Still, Sue, I would like to speak to him. Well, Ted, you don't have to wait on Clint, I can call Scott right now. Sue got her phone and called Scott. After some general banter, Sue gave the phone to Ted. Hello, said Ted. Ted, my name is Scott, and as Sue has told you, I don't follow cheaters. One of my partners on the force did this almost 10 years ago and is now disabled after a cheating husband caught him following him and his girlfriend. Ted, I do know a lady who will, and I have her number ready if you want it. Yes, Ted said, please. After Scott ended the call, he called Terry and briefly spoke to her. Terry was sitting in her car about 50 miles away watching a cheating wife kissing her lover. When Ted finally called her, Terry got his information and said, when I get back to town I will come by where you are, and we can talk. However, Ted, I am going to need some information about Carla. I need a good recent photo. I need a photo of her car taken front and back, at least one good enough so I can see the tag. If she has a job, I need to know where she works. I will also need to know where she likes to go hang out if you know. These are minimum things, or I will not accept the job. Ted said I can have all of this for you by noon tomorrow. Good, Terry said and ended the call. Ted spent the night at his sister's house and enjoyed some beers with Clint. Ted went back to his job to speak to another guy there. He knew he used pills to stay awake sometimes when he had deadlines. He wanted to see about buying some because he knew he would not be able to sleep in the coming days. After getting a few pills, Ted left and drove home. Where have you been, Ted? I was worried all night, Carla screamed. Ted told Carla, I had an emergency at work that required I make a quick trip into Harrisburg. While there I dropped my phone, and it stopped working. My mind was so busy I forgot to call you. Sorry, Carla. Carla knew something was wrong but just walked into the kitchen. Ted quickly got a camera and walked outside to take the photos of Carla's car. He also took a photo of Carla as she stood looking at him. Carla asked Ted, why did you take my photo in these clothes? I want to update my Facebook profile and will be cropping the photo anyway. Ted then took the card out of the camera and into his laptop and downloaded the photos into a flash drive. He told Carla that he also needed to go to Verizon to get another phone. Ted walked out of his house and went back to his sister's home. After he got a replacement phone, he called Carla and told her he was going to be pulling an all-nightery at work. Carla smiled when she got out her other phone and called Brian. Come on over, Ted is at work and won't be home. We can have dinner and some wine and enjoy each other. Brian smiled when he ended the call and looked at a very pregnant Carol and said that was work, I needed to go back. Brian was an electroencephalogram tech at the hospital, and he told Carol, I am on call right now and need to go to the ER. He left and about 10 minutes later was with Carla. Carol was not stupid, and she called a friend she knew that worked in the ER to see if Brian had come in. She promised to call Carol if he did. After 2 hours went by, Carol knew Brian had lied to her. Carol went to bed. After giving all the information Terry asked for to her, Ted paid her fee. He then made an appointment to see an attorney to get some information. He then, using Sue's car, drove back to his neighborhood and sipped on coffee as he watched his house. By the time he got there, Brian's car was parked in his driveway. Because it was dark, Ted had to walk close to the car to write down the tag number for Terry. After he told Terry about the car, she wanted it. Just be careful, Ted. After Ted called her with the tag number, she made a call and spoke to that person. Terry gave him the tag number and several minutes later found out the car belonged to Brian Davis and had his address. Terry then took a shower and went to bed. After Brian had finished, he returned home to find Carol was still in bed. He pulled himself up close to her when Carol hit him with her elbow and told him to get the hell out of her bed. Brian got up and sat down on the bed. Carol said, "Brian, listen to me very carefully. I know you were not at the hospital. Don't even attempt to say you were." Brian felt like all the breathing air was gone from the room and he ran into the hallway. Carol got up, slammed the door shut and, as she did, told Brian she wanted a divorce. Brian heard the door lock and because he was standing in the hallway only in his shorts, he just decided to go into the other bedroom and got in bed. Carol laid awake the rest of that night wondering what she was going to do. The next morning Carol got up and made some breakfast, then later threw it up. She was sitting in the living room looking outside when Brian got up, got dressed and left for work. No words were spoken that morning. Around 10 a.m. Carla was sitting in her kitchen wondering if Ted knew anything about Brian. What if he already had hired an investigator? Carla asked herself. I better cool down this affair for now. I can't risk losing Ted. About an hour later Brian called her and told her Carol found out he was cheating but did not know who with. Carla, I am going to be busy the rest of the day and plan to return home and attempt to fix my marriage. Carol is due to have the baby in about 3 weeks. I must be there for her. Carla, I want to have one last fling with you before we stop. Let's meet at the Best Western. Carla said to Brian this must be the last time. What Carla did not know was Ted had placed voice-activated recorders in the bedroom, kitchen, as well as the living room. Ted, still in Sue's car, sat and waited for Carla to leave the house. Finally, about noontime her car left the driveway. Ted quickly entered the house, filled the car with as many of his things as he could get and collected the recorders. He left about 30 minutes before Carla came back. Carla had so much on her mind she did not notice some of Ted's things missing from his closet and his diplomas were gone from the study. Carla grabbed some wine and watched TV. Where was Ted? She asked herself. Oh gosh, I can't lose Ted. What have I done? After tomorrow I am done with Brian and will spend the rest of my days as a devoted wife. Ted returned to his sister's home, and she allowed him to unload his things in the spare bedroom. Then Ted, still high from the pills and coffee, declined to eat. He just kissed Sue and said thank you and I should be back tomorrow. That night Ted slept in his truck. The bench seat was soft and using a pillow Ted lay there and listened to Carla's voice. He knew she would be at the Best Western that next day. He planned to just sit there and wait. It was about 11 a.m. when he noticed Brian and Carla enter the parking lot. He got the camera and started taking photos of them. He had several of them kissing as they went in to pay for a room. Then they opened the door to room 305 and he waited for about 30 minutes. He walked to the door and put his ear to the door. He could just barely hear lovemaking. Ted fought the urge to go back down to his pickup and douse the door with several gallons of gas he had, but just decided to knock on the door. Once Brian opened the door, Ted knew he was a larger man than Brian was. Ted pushed Brian backward into the room and could see Carla sliding off the bed onto the floor. Oh, no, Carla said. Ted, you were not supposed to know about this. What the lovebirds did not know was before he confronted them, he had spoken to Terry using his new phone and she had Carol with her, and they were due at the hotel any minute. Brian quickly put his clothes on and ran right into Terry and Carol. Brian did not look at Carol, he just got in his car and left. Brian knew his marriage was done. He also knew he was going to be paying child support for a long time. Brian was so preoccupied he did not notice the parked UPS van sticking out onto the road. He swerved to miss it and this action took him into the lane going in the opposite direction and his car crashed head-on into a large SUV. Brian did not make it to the ER. Neither did the elderly couple in the other car. Ted told Carla to get her clothes on or he would drag her naked to the pickup. He looked at Terry and said, Terry, I will catch up to you tomorrow. I am going to take Carla home. Terry asked Carol if there was anything she could do. Carol said no, she was going to call her parents and see if they would come to get her. The problem was they lived almost 100 miles away. She did not want to have the baby there. She told Terry I would do something. Carol cried all the rest of the way to her home. Carol had been home about 2 hours when the police officer knocked on her door. After being informed about Brian, Carol passed out and the police officer called for help. Carol woke up hearing a siren as the cop sat down beside her. Brian's parents helped Carol arrange for Brian's services. Carol's mother finally came to stay with her and was present when her baby daughter came into the world. Carol named her Becky. Carol never told her parents or in-laws what happened. She just decided that since Brian was gone there was no use soiling his memory. That cop followed Carol to the hospital and gave her his card. In the months after Becky was born, they got close and several years later Carol married him. Ted and Carla never really reconciled. They just became roommates. Carla attempted to get Ted to rekindle their love, but Ted just told her to date and let him be. Sue and Clint drove up in the driveway one day and asked both Ted and Carla to come out with them to eat. Ted hugged his sister but said he would never be seen out in public with Carla. Sue did not say anything else. She got in the car with Clint, and they left. One day, not long after this, Carla somehow discovered it was Katie who told Gus, and Gus told Ted about Brian. While at work, Ted got a phone call from the police station. Carla had been arrested for assault and her victim was in the hospital. Ted called Carla's parents and told them she was in jail and why. He was not going to go her bail. It took a while before he discovered the victim was Katie. Ted drove over to the hospital and told Gus how sorry he was. Katie was doing okay and would be released the next day if all was okay overnight. When her folks finally got Carla bailed out, she went to see an attorney to handle the divorce. A year later, Ted and Carla were divorced, and Carol was pregnant again. One night after several hours of drinking, Carla drove over to the graveyard where Brian's remains were. She squatted on top of his grave and relieved herself. Ted never remarried.